News series tonight. It's called The Big Game. Super Bowl's coming up in a couple weeks. It's going to be awesome. How many of you watched the Super Bowl? Some of you, a lot of you. All right, so did you know the Super Bowl is the most watched television program in America? How many of you knew that? All right, so I was curious this week what the most watched television programs in America were. And so I just did a quick Google search, most watched television programs in America. And Wikipedia, I know, not the most reliable source, but hey, take what you can get. Wikipedia gave me the top 50 most watched television programs in history of United States TV, as far as Wikipedia can go, right? 49 of the 50 of them were all Super Bowls. There is only one that was not a Super Bowl. And there's like over 100 million viewers or something like that. There was only one that was not a Super Bowl. It was probably a show that you guys have no idea what it is. It's an old show called MASH. And it was the series finale of MASH. It falls right smack dab in the middle. Every other most watched TV program is a Super Bowl of some sort or fashion. The Super Bowl is huge. It's massive. And so we're going to do a series for the next couple weeks that compare our lives to the big game, to the Super Bowl, right? And tonight we're talking about this whole idea that rules are important. And I know when you guys hear that, you're like, oh, crap, here comes another lesson about you need to follow the rules, right? But stick with me, all right? Just hang with me. Don't tune me out just because of some preconceived notions about what this might be about. 5 years ago, on this Sunday of playoff games, the Colts were playing the New England Patriots for a chance to go to the Super Bowl, right? Huge game for the Indianapolis Colts and the Patriots. And I was pumped, right? At that point, I was kind of phasing out of football, but I was still kind of following it here and there. I was paying attention because the Colts were in the Super Bowl. And before the game started, allegations came out because one of the Colts defensive men a few weeks prior had intercepted a football from Tom Brady and noticed something strange. The ball was a little bit flatter than normal. So apparently, supposedly, right? So allegations started flying. There was an interception the first half, which led to more allegations, which led to footballs being tested at halftime, which were apparently 2 pounds less pressure than they were supposed to be, which makes a ball easier to throw, easier to handle, easier to catch, easier to hold on to. The New England Patriots blew out the Colts, went on to win the Super Bowl, right? Huge fiasco, 2 years of investigations and figuring out exactly what went on. Tom Brady got suspended for a few games. The Patriots got fined. But there's never been any real definitive, this is what happened, and yes, they did it intentionally, and yes, they absolutely cheated. That's never been defined. But you know what? Even though it wasn't defined, I was ticked. How many of you remember that game? Anybody? I know it's kind of older. All right, a few of you remember that game, right? I was ticked because the New England Patriots weren't following the rules. And as far as I was concerned, they needed to forfeit that game and give the Super Bowl to the Colts, right? The Colts should have gone to the Super Bowl that year. Now, here's the deal. New England Patriots blew out the Colts like 40-something to 7. The truth of the matter is, more than likely, deflated balls would not have made a difference in the game. But if you ask any Indianapolis Colts fan 5 years ago, they made a huge difference in the game, right? And the Colts should have been the ones going to the Super Bowl. You know why? Because rules are important. Rules are important. And you can ask any Indianapolis Colts fan 5 years ago, hey, in that Colts game against the Patriots, were rules important? They would be like, yes, rules are important. The Patriots cheated their way into the Super Bowl. The Colts could have gone to the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. We would have had a second Super Bowl championship, right? The Indianapolis Colts fan would have said that 5 years ago because rules are important. Tonight I want to jump into John chapter 10. Jesus is talking to a group of his followers, and he's comparing life as a Jesus follower to sheep. And he's comparing himself to being the shepherd. He says this, "So Jesus again said to them, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and I will go in and out and find pasture.'" And then we're going to skip verse 10. We're going to come back to verse 10 next week and focus on it next week, but I want to focus on 7 through 9 and 11 this week. In verse 11, he says, "I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." Now, Jesus was speaking to people that would have totally understood exactly what it went into keeping track of a group of sheep. I know some of you are in here are in 4-H, and some of you take care of some animals, and some of you probably have some pets that you take care of. And so you have some sort of idea of what it takes to take care of an animal. But Jesus was comparing life to us being sheep and him being the shepherd. Now, in order to take care of sheep, there are a few things that a shepherd has to do. A shepherd has to make sure that he is moving his sheep regularly. In a system where you move sheep or cattle or other animals from pasture to pasture to pasture, generally, every day you move those animals at least a little bit, so that the grass that they were just grazing on has a chance to regrow, and the manure that was laid there goes into the soil and makes everything grow even better. And so you kind of go in this big circle so that by the time you get back to where you were now, it's all grown and it's fertile and it's ready to be eaten down again, and then you move on. And so every day, this shepherd gathers up his sheep and leads them to a new place. Now, sheep are creatures of habit, just like humans are creatures of habit. We don't necessarily like going to new places. We don't necessarily like doing new things. But the sheep every day have to be led to a new place. They have to be led to a place where they can find green pastures. They have to be led to a place where they can find good, healthy, clear water. Every night, the sheep need to be gathered back together, and the shepherd had this rod, and as they would be gathered together, this rod was kind of like a protector of the sheep, and so it had like a club thing, but sometimes they would put nails or sharp pieces of metal in it so that if an animal attacked, they could club the animal and protect the sheep. And so they would hold out this rod, and the sheep would pass under this rod, and they would count the sheep every night. And every night, the sheep had to pass under the rod to make sure that they were all gathered together, and they would count them. And the shepherd would have to inspect the sheep as they went under the rod to make sure that there were no injuries, nothing that needed fixed, nothing that needed adjusted. You know, if something was stuck in the sheep's wool, they had to make sure that the sheep were well taken care of. And this was a daily thing. The shepherd would lead the sheep to green pastures, would lead the sheep to the waters. They would lead the sheep at night to a place of safety. They would protect the sheep from wild animals. They would correct any injuries or blemishes in the sheep in their wool and make sure that they were safe. And in this comparison, we are sheep. And Jesus, he says he is two different things. There's kind of two layers of meaning going on here. He says first he is the door to the sheep. He is the door to the green pastures. He's the door to this life that the sheep are actually seeking. And it's only through Jesus that these sheep find life. It's this idea that Jesus is the only way to have a real relationship with God. When this life is over, we all want to go to heaven. We all want this incredible experience that we've heard of called heaven. And Jesus is the only way to find that. And Jesus also compares himself to the shepherd. And the shepherd daily leads his sheep. The shepherd has guidelines that the sheep have to follow. They have to make sure they stay together. They have to make sure that they don't stay on one plot of land for more time than they're supposed to, because they have to move on to the next plot. They have to make sure that they're leading them to a place where they can find enough water to drink. They have to make sure that they're all gathered together at night. It doesn't matter if a sheep wants to stay out late. They need to be gathered together for safety. And Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And we get that rules are important when it comes to sports. And sometimes we have difficulty understanding why rules are important in our own lives. There are some rules that we understand. You know, there are rules that we set up for ourselves. Some of you are athletes, and you set up rules for yourself. You are going to practice this much every day. You're going to make sure you watch what you eat. You're going to make sure that you are lifting weights. You're going to make sure that you are practicing your shot. You're going to make sure that you're running the way you're supposed to. Some of you play instruments, and you make sure that you practice every day and that you're pushing yourself and you're learning new things and you're gaining new experience. And we set up rules for ourselves. We make sure that we go to school. We make sure that we do our studies. There are rules that we understand and that we have set up for ourselves. And then there are some rules that we don't necessarily understand. There are some rules that are difficult for us to understand why they are in place. And you guys recognize when rules are important. And I've seen this dynamic play out over an open gym. When we have a crazy, intense game of dodgeball, and someone gets hit with the ball, but they don't go out, the person that didn't go out is like, I'm good. Like, this is not necessarily a rule I necessarily need to follow right now. But the other people on the other team are like, dude, you got hit, you're out, go. And there's this disconnect sometimes where rules are important, and we recognize that sometimes, but there's these other times that we're like, you know what, I'm not so sure this rule is important. And so my question to you tonight is simply this. For those rules that you are unsure of, and I'm sure that you have some, why do you think those rules are in place? I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just simply asking the question, why are those rules in place? Because so often, when we don't understand the rules, we don't take the time to really ask the question, well, why are those rules there? Like, what are my parents trying to help me out with here? What are my teachers trying to help me understand? What is Jesus trying to lead me to by placing these guidelines and these rules in place for my life? And so my question tonight is simply, why are certain rules in place in your own life? Why do your parents ask you to do certain things? Why do your teachers ask you to do certain things? What rules do you have set in place? Some that you understand, some that you don't understand. When I was younger, your age, I did not necessarily understand the rule of driving slow, right? Driving the speed limit was difficult for me. I thought I had control. And it wasn't until I got a few speeding tickets and I got into a pretty decent car accident and totaled a car that I realized, and even after that, it wasn't until I met Kirsten and she was like, dude, you really, seriously, you need to stop and slow down because, and we talked through, there are people in the car and you've got other lives at stake. And when I started to realize what was really going on and why those rules were in place, I really started to slow down a little bit. Our youngest daughter, Luna, she is kind of pushing the limits at times on the rules. She likes to do things that are somewhat dangerous. And so, like, she'll go sprinting through the house, and we're like, Luna, like, you cannot sprint from one room to the other. Like, she just goes running, and she will run so fast, she'll get to the kitchen floor, which is like a laminated floor, and we're like, Luna, you can't run through the family room to the playroom, like, you should walk. But she still tries to run through the family room to the playroom, and she'll hit that kitchen floor. Well, the door to the playroom is shut, and she'll try to stop to open that door, and she'll just smack dab right into the door, right? And then she's crying and she's upset because she hit the door, and we have to sit her down and say, this is why we don't run. I'm so sorry you got hurt. And so now she's getting to the point where we can say, Luna, I don't want you to get hurt. Daddy wants to make sure that you're safe. So let's please not jump on your bed underneath your sister's bed that is a bunk bed. You're going to hit your head and you are going to get very badly hurt. And she'll go, oh, okay. Like, oh, I never thought of that. Like, and so often, if we can have conversations, honest conversations with ourselves, with our parents, with God in prayer, and just say, why are those rules in place? Not in a negative way, like, Mom, Dad, why are these rules in place, right? But just like, help me understand. Because in John chapter 10, Jesus says he is the good shepherd, and there are rules and there are guidelines in place so that we can be led to green pastures. Let's be honest, guys. We want this life that is content. We want this life that is full. We want this life that is amazing. We want this life where we find the equivalent of green pastures and clear water and everything is great. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but we want a life with as few issues as possible. And so often, we fight against that life. And so often, we end up hurting ourselves. And so, as you think about what rules you have, what guidelines you have in place in your own life, instead of thinking, man, this rule sucks, I go, why do I have to do this? Maybe when you think that, that's an honest feeling, but maybe next time you have that thought and it pops into your head, ask yourself the question, all right, what green pasture is this trying to direct me toward? What pit is this helping me avoid? What wild animal that's going to attack me is this helping me avoid? So that I can have a life that is content and full, a life that Jesus intended for me to have. John chapter 10 talks an awful lot about life. And next week, we are going to focus on this idea that Jesus wants us to have the best possible life, not only in heaven, but right here on earth right now. And so we'll talk about life a lot next week. But this week, I want to simply pause and focus on the fact that Jesus has some guidelines. Jesus has some rules in place to lead us to green pastures. And so often we focus on the rules and what we're missing out on because of the rules, that we forget that they're actually leading us to a green pasture. And so I simply want you to ponder tonight, what rules do you have in place in your own life? And where are those rules really trying to lead you and guide you? I'm leaving some extra time tonight for small groups because tonight in your small group, I really want you to simply ask this question. What rules do I have in place? What rules are there that I understand, that I get, that I follow? What rules do I have in my life that I don't quite understand? And as a group, I want you to discuss, well, that rule is in place because, man, if you don't do that, then you could face this consequence or this repercussion. And if you do follow that rule, then there's this good thing that's waiting for you. And so I want to spend that time tonight in your small groups asking those questions. What rules do you follow? What rules don't you understand? So we're going to leave some extra time for that. But tonight I simply want you to ask yourselves, where are they leading? Because Jesus is the good shepherd, and Jesus put parents and leaders in place and rules and guidelines to help lead us to green pastures. He says, I am the good shepherd, and I lay down my life for my sheep. I give a practical challenge every week, and the practical challenge is simply this. I simply want you to ask yourself this question. I want you to sit down and actually think about it, actually talk about it. Have a conversation with your parents about rules that you don't understand. Say, hey, CJ told me to have this conversation. It may be awkward, but I'm going to have it. And just talk about it. You may come to some realizations that you never knew existed. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And part of being a good shepherd is having some rules and guidelines in place so we are led to green pastures. Check this out.